Hello, good morning. Welcome to Glasgow Rangers Nation. This is your Sunday supplement. It is Sunday, the 15th of June, guys. We are halfway through June already. God, can you believe where this year has gone? I mean, we're 6 months into the year and halfway through the 6 month. It's crazy. It's crazy. You know what? It'll be pre-season before we know it. The players will be back at Howie. And you know what? Before we even know it as well, we'll be getting ready for Champions League qualifiers. It's just mental, isn't it? Football these days is becoming a 24/7 business. There seems to be no rest for the wicked. And God, we must have all done something really bad in a previous life to be this in this position that we're in now. And let's face it, Rangers must have done some pretty bad. Anyway, look, let's talk all things Rangers. We're going to talk Poku this morning. We're going to talk Nicolas Raskin. We're going to talk Hamza Igamane. We're going to talk obviously what the Belgian national team coach has been saying about Hamza, he's Moroccan, about Nicolas Raskin. We've also going to talk a little bit about the Hamza Igamane situation at the club. And we're going to kind of look at, a bit of evidence around, how Leeds work. These are our new owners now. These guys own Leeds United. They've obviously, have a track record of how they run football clubs. And we'll look at how this may affect us keeping hold of our top players this summer. And there is, I think, some parallels between Leeds United and Rangers. If you go back, let's start off with the Nicolas Raskin situation. So look, Raskin is, really has had a breakout season. When he came to the club initially in that January transfer window, when Michael Beale was here, he really impressed and he looked a hell of a player. And then injuries and form kind of held him back. And there was a lot of Rangers fans questioning Nicolas Raskin and his future at the club, questioning whether or not he had a future at the club, questioning, whether or not he was right for Rangers. And I think, he more than answered those critics last season, where he was by far Rangers' best player and probably the best midfielder in Scottish football by an absolute street. And the other side of the city can tell you about Callum McGregor, the most overrated player in Scottish football. Or they can tell you about Arne Engels, the shittest £11 million midfielder in the world. But none of them compare to Raskin, and statistics bear that out. And I know that statistics and facts are something the other side of the city don't deal well with because they're all a bit thick, and I think it's the inbreeding that does it. But there we go. Anyway, look, I think, you look at the situation, Raskin is the best midfielder by a street. And he is obviously now, because of his form, not only for Rangers, but the fact that he is now a full Belgian international and has played exceptionally well for Belgium in the games that he's played. I mean, recently, obviously, his debut, he was given a standing ovation when he came off and was voted the man of the match. And in the two recent internationals, obviously, he started one, was outstanding next to Kevin De Bruyne, and then obviously came on and helped to change the game against Wales. Damn, my Welsh boys lost. So look, that's where we're up to with this situation. Raskin, is class act. He's an absolute class act. He seems to really had his best position unlocked. And I think, one thing that Barry Ferguson did get right during his time at the club was the fact that he really brought Raskin on. He really developed Raskin as a player and turned him into a real beast of a number 6 stroke number 8 kind of player. If you look at parallels, he's not a Rodri 6. If you look at some of the top 6s in the world, I'm not saying that he's at that standard yet, but if you look at, Rodri, who's probably the best number 6 in world football, Martin Zubimendi, another top number 6 who looks like he's on a move for a big money. He's not that sort of number 6 who's solely defensive, solely, there to turn the ball over, to recover, to recycle and to reuse. That's not what he's there for. He's more, I think, if you're going to compare him to anybody, like a Ryan Gravenberch, the Liverpool number 6, who doesn't just do that job, also brings the ball out, also distributes the ball well, will also be found on the edge of the area, having the odd shot or two. He's more in that kind of mould. And this is a lad who is now, obviously, like I said, attracting attention from all over Europe, and players and teams, even in the EPL, are now looking at him. And we're not talking about bottom end teams. We're not talking about teams in the lower half or the mid table of the EPL. We're talking about top EPL clubs. We're talking about Villa. We're talking about Newcastle are looking at this player. These are, Champions League and Europa League clubs. These are top clubs, big English clubs. Now, one club apparently that is set to step up their interest in Nicolas Raskin over the coming weeks and days is Aston Villa. Villa, who obviously in controversial circumstances just missed out on the Champions League last season due to a referee basically giving the game to Manchester United. Maybe the days of Sir Alex and referees favouring Man United are not over. Hey, who knows? But anyway, his national team coach, Rudy Garcia, has apparently said that he wants Raskin to play in the EPL and has pushed for Raskin to go to Aston Villa. He feels this will be better for his international prospects, better for him as an international manager to have players playing in the English Premier League, which is obviously the highest standard in the world at this moment in time. Now, look, obviously Garcia is entitled to his opinion, as we all are. Obviously, personally hope that Raskin doesn't go to Aston Villa. Personally hope that he stays at Rangers, that he has at least another season with us, and the value that he has will increase exponentially. I mean, I think Rangers could do a lot to keep him. I think we could give him an extension, increase his wages, make him the captain. I don't think he is going to be made the captain. I think, unfortunately, we are stuck with James Tavernier being captain next season. And we will be stuck with captain loser. But and it may be part of the reason why Raskin leaves. You never know. But, I think Raskin to Villa, if it was to go ahead, if it was to be something that is kind of nailed on, you've got to look at getting the maximum possible value for him. And, you heard from journalists during the week talking about the Raskin situation. You heard about one journal in particular saying that, Rangers are not used to selling players for big money and that taking 15 million would be expected and would be okay, which was just, the guy who made that comment is an absolute clueless fanny. He really is. But I think, you should be looking for 20 to 25 million pound for the player. You really should be looking for about 20 to 25 million pound for the player. And it certainly doesn't help, when you've got people underselling him. But, this is a guy who, if you look at, the kind of evidence over time, you look at what they've sold players for. Matt O'Reilly, I think, went for around 30 million euro, which was around about 26 million pounds. Raskin, we should be looking at something similar for Raskin. Why should we be undervaluing our players and selling cheap, for that 20 million pounds? I think that's just utterly ludicrous to even assert that. These are our players. They're under contract now. I know that Raskin is kind of at the peak of his value. He has 2 years left on his contract. And, this is the time to sell or to renew. And everyone says that 2 years is the premium time, because the moment you break that last 2 years, you get into the last 12 to 18 months of any contract, value starts to decrease because teams will just wait it out. As you often see Real Madrid do, as they've done with Mbappe and Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example. So, look, I think we do need to, obviously, if we are going to sell Raskin, push for maximum value on him. The Desas fee, apparently, I've heard that Desas fee could be as little as £3 million. That's what I'm hearing, which would represent a £1.5 million loss on the player. It could rise. Apparently, there are add-ons within the deal, which could lead to the deal rising to around about £5 to £6 million, depending, obviously, on performance by Cyril Desas and achievements by Ajax Athens. Overall, I'm a little disappointed with that. That's not the sort of value that I was hearing, that I was reading, that I was seeing. Look, I have my views on Cyril Desas. I personally don't think he's a top striker. I don't think he's a good striker. I think he's a very average footballer. I think 18 goals in the SPL is pathetic. In a league that is, other than Rangers and Celtic, is a very weak league. You look at the situation around Europe and some of the other leagues and the weaker leagues. I'm not talking about the EPL or La Liga or Serie A or the Bundesliga. I'm talking about some of the weaker leagues, the Dutch league, the Portuguese league, the Belgian league. And top scorers in virtually all those leagues outscored Desas. And the Dutch league, I think the top scorer got 24 goals and he was a midfield player. So 18 in the SPL is pretty pathetic. If you're going to be top scorer in the SPL, you should be aiming, especially when you play for Rangers or Celtic, and you create the chances that those two teams create, you should be looking at 25 to 30 goals. And Desas could have easily had 25 to 30 goals. Let's not forget that. The guy did miss an absolute shed load of chances. So there is that kind of element that may have lowered his value slightly, but I still, kind of think that 2 to 3 or 3 million, which seems to be the fee that was suggested by one news outlet, which, there we go, is 3 million. So I think that's disappointing, to be honest with you. Very, very disappointing indeed, if that's the fee. Now, look, so we've got about the Hamza Igamane situation. Okay, we're going to talk about Kavama Poku and Rangers possibly signing him shortly, so please hang on for that. But let's talk about the whole situation around Hamza Igamane. Hamza Igamane has been valued by the club at €15 million. And as I said on the podcast last night, that's the 15 million figure that keeps getting bandied around, that keeps getting talked of. People, I think, have misconstrued that as £15 million. It's not £15 million, it's €15 million. 15 million euro is around about 12.5, 12.7, 13 million pounds, which again, personally, I think is undervaluing the player. I think had we looked at a situation where he had played as a 9 at the end of the season, we probably could have got substantially more for him. Unfortunately, I think that £15 million is the kind of ceiling of his value at this point in time. And I think a lot of that is down to how he was used at the end of last season, that he wasn't really given the opportunity to show that he was a top potential striker. And that's down to Barry Ferguson. Barry's probably cost us, somewhere in the region of £2-3 million through his intransigence and his refusal to play Hamza through the middle. So 15 million, I think, would be a marketed value for Hamza. I don't want to sell Hamza. Let's get this straight. I'm not sitting here this morning, guys. Please don't think I'm sitting here this morning saying I want to sell Raskin. I want to sell Hamza. I don't. I do want to sell Desas. That's actually made my year, the fact that he's moving. But Hamza and Raskin, I do not under any way, shape or form want to sell. They're both absolute class act players. They're top players. They're the sort of players we should be building a team around. But like I said, the value for Hamza has been depressed slightly by the fact that he wasn't used correctly last season. He was stuck out on the left wing. And people talk about, oh, well, I used to play loads of different positions and everything. Well, yeah, but the level's different, mate. You playing park football or Sunday league football or amateur football is very different to the level these guys work at. And the point I always make is stick Erling Haaland on the left wing, see how he gets on. Stick Florian Wirtz at centre half, see how he gets on. Stick Julian Alvarez, the Atletico Madrid striker, in goal, see how he gets on. Take let's say take Jude Bellingham and put him at right back and see how he gets on. You're not going to get the same level of performance from those players. Of course you're not. And there is, without, unless that player is a hybrid player, like a Dujon Sterling, like a Josh Mulligan, to some degree, for taking another example, a Rangers player at this moment in time, take, let's say, Bayrami. I know he's shit, but he can play a number of positions. Shit, but, I'm taking that point. And Hadji can as well. He can play as an 8, he can play as a 10. Again, he's left, but again, the point is valid. Unless you were a hybrid player, you do have a lot of more specialisation in positions. And like I said, you wouldn't stick Erling Haaland on the left wing, although Barry Ferguson probably would have done just to kind of crowbar Cyril Desas into the team probably last season. But there we go. Look, at the end of the day, you look at it and you say that's depressed the value. That's where we're at with that one. Now, I think if you look back at the 49ers Enterprises and their ownership of Leeds, and you look at how they worked last summer. Now, last summer, Leeds had just missed out on automatic promotion. They then lost the playoff final to Russell Martin Southampton, and were in a position where they had some top-level stars and Premier League clubs, and other clubs were sniffing around these players. And they were kind of left in a position where, because they hadn't gone up, they had to sell these players to generate income. Now, so they sold Jorginho Ruta to Brighton, I think it was. They sold Crescencio Somerville to an EPL club. I think it was West Ham. And they sold Archie Gray to Spurs. 3 of their most prized assets, and generated an absolute shit ton of money for all 3 of them. They really did. It was an absolute boatload of cash that they brought in. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that that Raskin, Hamza, Dio, etc. are going to generate the money that those guys generated. That's just not going to happen. It's not possible. These guys obviously, be playing in England, etc. It's going to generate a hell of a lot more income. Ruta went for 45 million, Gray for 40 million, and Somerville for 25 million. So you're looking at what, 45, 40, 85, 65, 85. 105, nearly 110 million pounds worth of transfer value. Now, you're not going to get the same for our players, but that's and that money then was reinvested into the playing squad. A number of players were signed for that money. Now, I think there is perhaps some parallels here where you're looking at players like Hamza, players like Raskin, players like Diamonde, attracting interest from top Premier League clubs or the good Premier League clubs. So, for instance, Raskin, interest from Leeds, newly promoted. That's going to be an interesting one. Aston Villa, Newcastle. Then obviously Diamonde attracting interest from Everton, which I think would be a mistake for him to move to that club. And then obviously Hamza getting interest from West Ham, from Spurs, etc. So look, there's interest there in our players. Now, if you look back at the track record and the way that the 49ers may look to supplement the transfer budget this summer, and the fact that Rangers, and these guys are not stupid, that these guys are not idiots. Kevin Thelwell as well, Dan Purdy, they're not idiots. They'll have looked at this playing squad and gone, yeah, right, it needs a lot of work. There's a lot of players here that shouldn't be here, but we're going to struggle to move them on. There's a lot of players here that are not good enough to play for this club, but we're going to struggle to move them on. And we're going to need to bring players in. And realistically, we're going to need to generate income, because if we generate income, it increases what we can spend. Because due to PSR restrictions, FFP restrictions, you can't just get a situation where the 49ers come in and say, right, there's 50 million, 60 million, go for it, sign who you want. Because you then look at FFP, you look at PSR, we start to breach that. So they've got to kind of bring that in. Now, if they were to go away and generate, let's say, 50, 60, 70 million pounds in player sales through the sales of Dio, Hamza and Raskin, then you've generated that 60 to 70 million pound of player sales. It therefore increases what you can then spend this summer, because that money can be reinvested in the transfer budget. It increases your revenue. You can spend that percentage of your revenue. I think it's 82% of your revenue. It increases what you can spend. So they're looking at it from this, and they've talked very much about the fact that this needs to be a self-sustaining business. It needs to be a club that doesn't rely on director loans, that doesn't rely on people bailing it out every 6 months, every 12 months. It is a club that runs efficiently. It runs financially responsibly. It's never put in a position again like 2012. And that is to be welcomed. We don't want that situation. But they still at the same time recognise that the money has to be spent to challenge at the top level. Now, we know that one of the big reasons why the 49ers invested in Rangers was because of the European football element. They want to be involved in the Champions League. They know that's one of the big things they've always said. So therefore, they're going to look to invest money into the club to help us get there, as well as obviously the other side of the business of trying to run this as a business. What you've got to remember, and it's the same as I said on the podcast last night, these guys are businessmen. They're sports businessmen. They're not alleged fans running a football club. These are guys who want to see a return on their money, but also want to see that the business they're running is being successful. Good businessmen, CEOs, chairmen, finance directors, marketing directors, whatever, comms directors, all want to see their business that they're running do well, because it's good for their reputation, it's good for them as a business, and they don't want to just be asset strippers that sell and don't invest. So let's get this out of the thing that they're just here to take money, or they're not going to put in money. They are, because at the end of the day, it's good for them, it's good for the club. But like I said, there is elements there where there is similarities between what happened at Leeds and what could happen at Rangers this summer. Somerville, Ruta and Gray, Reid Raskin, Dio and Hamza. We haven't got, unfortunately, a lot of prized assets at this club at this moment in time. We haven't got a lot of players who will generate a shed ton of income. You may get 4 to 5 million for Jack Butland now, whereas you would have probably got about 10 million last summer. You won't get a lot for Liam Kelly. You won't get hardly anything for James Tavernier. John Suter, again, you're not going to get a lot for him. And Ciali, nobody's probably interested. Hiefte, again, not a lot there. Ridvan, you may generate 4 million, 5 million, 3 to 5 million. There's a lot of players there you're not going to generate a lot of income for, because that's just the case. Cheney, who wasn't our player, if he had been, he would have generated a lot of income. Connor Barron, again, not going to generate a lot of income. So you've got to look at your income generators, your players who are going to make money. And unfortunately, that is 3 of our best players, Raskin, Hamza and Dio. But you've got to look at it long term in terms of that money coming in can be reinvested and brought in to bring in the likes, obviously, of Dor Turgeman, Connor Cody, Harry Darling, Kavama Poku, etc., etc. And that's along with the investment money where you're going to go and get these players from. That's going to enable us to sign multiple strikers, multiple defenders, multiple midfielders, multiple wingers. This is this financially responsible model, this trading model that we're now on this cycle of producing at the football club. Look, I'll try to explain it as best as I can. Hopefully that works. I don't know, it's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting how football finance works these days with this PSR and FFP, which doesn't seem to apply to all clubs. I mean, certainly down in England, they seem to be able to spend what the hell they like and get away with it. Look at Manchester City, who are probably going to get away with those 115 charges. Right, so let's talk a bit of Kavama Poku now. So Rangers allegedly interested in Kavama Poku from Peterborough. Now, Barry Fry, those of you who remember Barry Fry, as he always terms himself, the big fat bastard, former Birmingham City manager, former Peterborough manager, is involved with Peterborough United now. I think he's their sporting director or something like that. Now, according to him, there are 25 clubs interested in securing the services of Kavama Poku, the Ghanaian international. He is that much in demand. He's a very good footballer, don't get me wrong. And this is a player who I honestly believe that if he was to come to Rangers, for example, he was to play well in the domestic league, he was to play well in Europe, that in 12 to 18 months, 2 years' time, you're probably looking at this player being worth 15, 20 million, 25 million. You're looking at him being worth a substantial amount of money. This guy is top-notch, top-notch. A real talent. He's someone that a lot of scouts, a lot of analysts, a lot of coaches rave about. He's quick, he's direct, he's skillful. Very, very good indeed. Like I said, Barry Fry has said that Rangers face competition from 25 other clubs to secure the services of Kavama Poku. He's basically said that whoever gets him is going to get this diamond, the player that is going to be worth a substantial amount of money. He is someone who is very much in Rangers' thoughts by all accounts. Rangers have, it has kind of come out through club partners, through those involved with the club, that we are interested in Connor Cody, we are interested in Harry Darling, we are interested in Dor Turgeman, and we are interested in Kavama Poku. So there's clearly, obviously, designs there to spend money to bring players in. Poku would be seen as the ideal replacement for Václav Černý. He does a very similar job to Černý. He plays on the right, but he's left-footed. He cuts in off the right a lot. He does a very similar job to what Václav Černý did, and obviously, the likelihood is that we don't get Václav Černý back due to his spiralling fee. Poku's 23 as well, so he very much fits that player trading model. That young player come in, develop, improve, 2-3 years time, sell him for massive money. He had 12 goals and 8 assists last year in League One in 27 appearances. And like I said, before anybody comes back with that, he's a League One player, we shouldn't be looking at that. He's a very talented player. And 25 clubs, or 24 clubs, including Rangers, 25, would not be looking at him if he was some duffer. Guys, let's get away from this. Like I said, he's quality player. Quality player. Barry Fry's, talked about the fact as well that he said that, in his opinion, Poku is destined for the Premier League eventually one day. He says he's speaking to 25 clubs at home and abroad, and he will go wherever he wants to. He says, I spoke to him on Friday morning, but he's not decided where he wants to go at the minute. He's such an exciting player. Wherever he goes, he'll be a fan's favourite. He spent a couple of years at Colchester and we took a punt on him. We have had a lot of offers for him we've turned down because we wanted to get promotion. Now that he has the choice, I've had loads of clubs from Portugal, Belgium, Germany, England and Scotland on about him. I was asking clubs for 5 million and 5 million add-ons when they were interested previously. I mean, this is the player, obviously, you're looking at £10 million, a total package for a League One player. So this is a decent footballer. He has that potential. He's that good a player. So looking at that, very good indeed. Fry said, yeah, we'd get some money from FIFA, but we wouldn't be ideal for us when we lose him. So look, this is a player, like I said, who is very well, very, very highly rated. I certainly hope that this is someone that we're definitely going to push it to try and get. Now, yes, the competition is there. Yes, other clubs may be able to offer him a whole lot more money. But I don't know who those other 24 clubs are. He's talked about Portugal, he's talked about Germany, he's talked about England. I don't know I know one of them is Birmingham City, but I don't know who the other ones are. We've got to basically sell the club. This is a club on a mission. This is a club that is rebuilding. This is a club that is heading in a new direction, exciting new beginnings. This is a club that plays in front of 55,000 week in, week every other week. This is a club that has an amazing history dating back to 1872, Celtic fans. This is a club that plays European football. This is a club that can win trophies. This is a club that has new management. This is a club that has a new vision. And these are the selling points we've got to put across to him. And we've got to obviously not be tight on wages. The fact that we were willing to pay some absolute average footballers a lot of money, in the past, we've got to kind of reference that. And Poku is certainly not an average footballer. I'm not saying that he should get anywhere near this, but when you consider that we're paying James Tavernier £35,000 a week for what? God only knows, for the odd penalty here and there. At the end of the day, you've got to look at, maybe you go looking a bit more ambitious in your offer to Poku. If you really want to get him, if you really rate him that highly, you've got to push that boat out for him. So, look, the elements are there. We've got to get them in place. Hopefully we can get this one across the threshold and bring him to Glasgow. Right, look, there's a number of deals out there. Hopefully some things will start to move next week. That's what I'm hearing, that possibly by the start to midpoint of next week, we may see things starting to move, especially now that players seem to be on their way out. The likes, obviously, of Desas going to Ajax. Harry Darling is another one, hopefully. I like him. I think he's a good player. I think he's a very good player. I've done some more study into him. He looks a great ball-playing centre-half. He looks a very solid centre-half. He looks like a player who could really fit into Russell Martin's system. A very talented footballer. Very talented footballer. Hopefully he is someone we can get across the line. Guys, look, it's going to be an interesting few months, isn't it? Or interesting few weeks. We haven't really got months, have we? Because the Champions League qualifiers are in July. I mean, that's fucking mental, isn't it? I mean, absolutely mental. The Champions League qualifiers are coming up so soon, and... look, yes, I admit that it's going to be really tough for us to get into those Champions League qualifiers, especially if we haven't brought in new players. We've got a new manager trying to bed into into the whole into the whole new system. We've really got to push this. We've really got to push this. So, look, Rangers, do have to go into the second qualifying round. We will face either Panathinaikos of Greece, Servette of Switzerland, or Brann of Norway. I'd much rather face Servette or Brann. If we get through that, then we could face... I mean, this is, again, open to who qualifies, who gets through. If we get through the second qualifying round, we then have to go into that next qualifying round, where we could face the likes of Red Bull Salzburg, good team, Fenerbahce, who we've already played, Nice, Victoria Plitzen, and then another round. So we've got 3 rounds to get through to get to the Champions League qualifier group, the league phase. We've got to get through that second qualifying round, third qualifying round, and then the final qualifying round. So there's 3 lots of ties, 6 games we have to play to qualify for the Champions League. If we get through that final round, we could face the likes of Benfica, Club Bruges, for example. So again, it's getting tough. We have to get these players in. We have to get them bedded in sooner rather than later, guys. This is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I personally don't think we'll make it this season. I don't think we'll get there. I think we could actually have a season without European football. I really do. I don't know. It's a risk. It's a risk. Right, guys, thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation this morning. Hopefully you have a great Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the Rangers dads out there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe as we seek to grow the channel. We're doing really well at the moment. I think it's last time I looked, 7,450 subscribers. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support. I'd love to get to 7,500 by the end of next week, and then 7,500 by the end of next week. And I'd love to get to 8,000 by the start of the new season, guys. So please obviously help us get there by subscribing, sharing, spreading the word, and getting the word out there about a channel that doesn't charge you for content, that doesn't ask you to pay it £2.50 a month, to get any access to content. Thank you for watching. As always, remember, we are the people.